Hi, this is Jeff White with Life and Living Now, and I want to talk a little bit today and bring up my notes, excuse me, of the Four Noble Truths. This comes from Buddhism, and I'm not Buddhist. However, whenever I come across a line of thinking, a framework that for me resonates with truth and provides me a platform for which I can begin to organize my thoughts and take a look at them. I always value those. And so within Buddhism that came in with the Four Noble Truths, and they're very quite simple. The first truth is life is suffering. And the way this came about, as the story goes, the original Buddha um, was a prince, and he had been shielded from any type of displeasure, um, dis-ease and disease, and you know everything. As far as he was concerned, he was weighted on hand and foot. Um, Everything was taken care of. He never saw any suffering, never experienced any pain. And so when he left the um, the palace, then he had a rather rude awakening, and he realized, okay, life is suffering. But that is, but all of us who live, we know, you know, there's joy, there's pain, and life. And when I first heard this, it really struck me as negative, but I kind of understood the intent. I think was, we like to think, everything's good, Pollyanna, but we have to accept even the unpleasant things in our life. And one of the unpleasantries that we need to accept is that, you know, life at times sucks. Life has suffering inside it. Now, the second one is there is a cause to that suffering. So there's a cause to that pain. And the third is, there's, so one, we know there is suffering. There's a cause to suffering, and for them, the cause involves, greed or desires and attachments. There's part of the root causes. We'll come back to that. And then, of course, there's the bullet point of there's an end to it. There's a path. There's a way out, and that way out is, according to the Buddhist thought, then the Noble Eightfold Path. So when we start looking at the idea of suffering, then it involves dissatisfaction. I read one translation that kind of is translated, instead of being life is suffering, life is filled with unsatisfactoriness, which is an interesting way to put that. But it's just truth, and things in life changes. And the good doesn't stay, it's impermanent. The bad doesn't stay, it's impermanent. And when we want the good to stay, and it doesn't, then we can create suffering for ourselves. When, the bad things happen and we rail against them, we don't accept them, it creates suffering. And, the suffering isn't caused, and as I was, most of the translations read, suffering is caused by desire and attachments. And the Buddhist idea was they wanted to, since what we see, feel, hear, taste, touch is all relative, subjective, then they're impermanent. They can come, they can go. What is real is what is impermanent, is what is permanent. What's real is what will not change. And that's consciousness, that's awareness. Even before consciousness, that's awareness. Within this idea of awareness is the collective consciousness. It makes room for the Tao. It makes room for universal consciousness or universal intelligence, or any name that you wish to put that, God, however you wish to put that. So all that kind of makes room for that. But that's what's permanent. And so we focus on that. Now, with the Buddhists, they would cut out all your senses and pay attention. I always had a little bit of an issue with that, because part of our evolutionary development as we come in is we get to see this nature, and it's beautiful and it's varied, and there's lots of good lessons in there. There's more than one tree in the forest, and yet we value all the trees and they all work together. So there's a lot of lessons that are in with that. So when I look at desires, I was going, well, what is it about that, and yes, it creates attachment. It pulls us away from our focus on just awareness. But for me, it was more. And, it was in meditation, I began to see that desires were an acknowledgement. It was a grasping. It was wanting to fulfill something that you felt was not fulfilled within you. Go back to, whenever I used to do goal setting, whether it was for myself or whether I was teaching this to groups or to our team, part of the idea that you wanted to look at was not just what goals that you wanted to achieve, but why. And more importantly, what's the feeling that you would get from that? From the achievement of that goal, what does that goal represent? We may say, I want to make, X number of dollars a year. I want to have a net worth of X amount. And then ask yourself, the fulfillment of that, how does it make me feel? What is that emotional part that I'm after? Remember Maslow and his hierarchy. And we start out, with security and safety. And so all those things, when we start setting goals, what do we want to achieve? I want to have a certain money in the bank. Why? Just because I want to feel good? Okay. But when we go deeper than that, it usually has to do because I want my security. I want to know that I am secure in my future. I want to know I'm secure in my finances. So there's that sense of security that we seem to have missing because, is there a trust that the universe will supply our needs? That's what we don't. That requires a certain amount of faith. But when I look at the world, that all of us are spirit. So we think of, we all come from this ocean, and each individual life could be, similar, analogous to the rise of a wave, but we're still part of that whole. When you recognize that you are that whole, you recognize that you are whole, not just that you are part of this spirit and consciousness, but you are whole. There is nothing that you need. It is from our perspective that we are lacking something that this becomes an issue. All right? So we have, yes, there's suffering, and there's a cause to suffering, and that cause is... Get back in business here. Sorry, we said something pop up. So in that cause is grasping, and that idea of desire and that attachment, and why we become attached to things, because we think it will fulfill something in us that we perceive as missing. And until we understand there is nothing that's missing within us, we're going to continue to grasp hold of that. We're going to continue to try and reach and find something to fill that void, to make us feel comfortable, to make us feel loved. All those emotions that we look for our goals to fulfill are fulfilled in the deepest part of you when we let go of our attachments to those ideas, to those thoughts, to those beliefs, and we hone in and we focus on who we are and who we are at our deepest level, that we are spirit. So that to me was a very good answer for me, for why in the writings it talked about desire. I understand that as we desire things to fulfill us, but we have forgotten that we are already fulfilled. We have forgotten that we are already whole. And so that's part of what we want to learn. That's part of the meditation. It's part of what Qigong will help do. The meditation and the study of consciousness, of awareness, of our inner life is what will lead us to those truths. Now, the end for the Four Noble Truths, well, there's a path, so there's a way out. So they said, yes, there's a problem, and here's what the problem is. And hey, good news, the next truth is there is a way out, and here's the way out. And the way out, in terms of this, was the Noble Eightfold Path. Now, we will discuss more of this a bit later because it deserves its own little talk. But the idea of the Noble Eightfold Path consists of a right or proper understanding, right or proper thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So when you look at that, we're looking at, okay, our perspectives, our understanding. How do I view the world? If our understanding is not right, then we're going to create illusions and delude ourselves. Now, I ran across this word in some writings where they changed right to skillful. And that was transformative for me, because then I looked at it, and when I read this, I go, okay, the Noble Eightfold Path consists of skillful understanding, a more skillful thought, skillful speech. Well, now that changes it. Now there's a skill that can be developed. We don't just have to wait for the insight to come. We can build these skills. When I read and I study and I write and I journal, when I'm sitting in meditation and I'm observing and being the witness to my consciousness, I am looking to understand more deeply life and truth. And the more skillful I am of making that discernment of wisdom, the greater peace I will have. The same thing, okay, am I thinking correctly? Some disciplines call the renewing of the mind. We want to make sure that our thoughts, which are usually on automatic, are intentional. The more intentional, more quiet we can make our mind, the more our thoughts align with spirit and are intentional, the more power they have. Because remember, you are creative. You are a creative being. Your words and your thoughts are creative power. But we have to believe that. It is our intention and our understanding and our belief of that makes the effect apparent. If we're doubting our word, if we're doubting our thoughts, if we really don't believe that our thoughts are creative and that can have an impact, well, then they won't. Life is funny that way. What you believe you can make happen, but it requires intention. There's a lot of extra steps. It's not just, okay, I believe this, so now I see it magically happen. It takes skill. It takes an enormous amount of focus. It takes intention and a right perspective to make all that happen. So also we're looking at, say, right speech, more skillful speech. How do we speak? How do we convey ideas? How do we speak to each other? Right now, in the last decade or more, on the political side of things, it's been horrible. It's been, there's lots of misinformation, disinformation that's out there, and there's wholesale prejudice and bigotry going on, all in the name of claiming a certain moral superiority. And this goes for both sides. I am independent, so I look at both sides. I see this going on. Take all that, set it aside. All that operates in this area where it will change. All right? It's not lasting. It's not permanent. What is permanent is your spirit. What is permanent and what affects you more than anything else is your response, is where are your thoughts, where are your fears, what are you scared of, what can you work on to alleviate those fears, not from changing exterior circumstances, but going deeper, When I was in business and first starting out, I was in sales, and it was commission sales, and I remember I would stress and I would go walk. It's like I would pray, and I wanted that business to build. And I realized my belief in the early parts of my business were such that I always produced, and I always produced enough to get by. I had to work on a lot of my subconscious beliefs. Scarcity mentality was a big one that came up. I had to work on that. Had to work on always feeling like I was the underdog. Now, we champion the underdog a lot in our society. But if you consider yourself only the underdog because you value and you need that sense of struggle, you never feel comfortable if you make it up to the top. You're going to self-sabotage yourself. So this is why having these right thoughts and right perspectives, more skillful thoughts, skillful perspectives, come into play. Right livelihood, more skillful livelihood. This speaks mainly to not dealing in things like weapons and things that create misery for others. Having right effort, skillful effort. How much effort are you going to put into this? And are you getting your results? Well, it may require more effort, but is it just strictly the effort of backbone, or is it the effort, the discipline to be mindful, the discipline to be aware, to control your thoughts, to harness your thoughts, to be more skillful? That is the effort. Skillful in mindfulness, be more skillful in concentration, focus. So these are all the steps and the paths along this line of thought to help you get rid of this suffering that you have in life. And so it becomes this path that gives you things to work on. And when I came across this back in the 90s, it was also, and I use the word transformative because it was, but it gave me a structure to look at. Okay, it gave me a structure. And like I said, I don't consider myself Buddhist, although a number of my beliefs do align with Buddhist thought, the same with Taoist and most every other religion. And I pull back. If you pull back far enough, they all eventually will say the same thing. But as you're following, say, trying to understand the truths, and you're following the Eightfold Path, a lot of this is you want to have awareness and acceptance of what is, of what's real. And in order to have acceptance of what is real, you have to get to what is real. And that's where the meditation comes in. That's where the acceptance comes in. That when I accept there's going to be suffering in my life, then it doesn't throw me for a loop. I know this will pass. Now, I may want to look and say, okay, what prompted this? What created the experience that I'm now feeling? And let me kind of point out something too as well. There is a difference between pain and suffering. Pain is the immediate nerve ending. Pain is the emotion we may feel at the very beginning when something just happens. Suffering is when we carry it with us through our days, through the week, through the life, when we just won't let it go. I reached out to a individual, I guess it was last week, and he had come to one of my seminars and had participated in it, and it was actually, he was not a seminar. He'd come to one of my classes, and we had actually, that class, we just had teachers there. It was very small, and so and he was contributing. He was giving some good insights, and it was fine. On Facebook, I made some comment about not allowing, if you are triggered, then I feel it's your responsibility to understand where those triggers, why you're being triggered, and to work on that, because it shows there's an injury, there's a hurt that's there. Well, he got offended with that. He wanted to retain the right to be upset if somebody stepped on his foot, and we just kind of let it go. And somehow the conversation went into several other things, and was off topic, and I don't remember all the details now. But he got upset. He was dissatisfied with the conversation, and he was trying to lead me into an acknowledgement of something that I simply didn't feel was true. And so the conversation is beginning to feel more manipulative. So we just shut it down. It's been several years, and I just sent him then an invite to a seminar I was having, and his response was rather rude. And I go, wow, okay, I don't hold grudges, and I just wanted to, invite you and see if we could, if there was a need to bury a hatchet. I didn't know there was at the time. But what struck me was this was 5 years or more ago, and he was still carrying that around. And why? It doesn't impact me at all. It doesn't change anything. It impacts him, and that's what holding those grudges does. When we don't accept the fact that there may be suffering in our life, we push it down, we repress it, and we all know that it will come back to us. Practicing mindfulness and mindful living, being conscious of your thoughts and your actions, as well as their consequences, is one of the best ways of being able to conduct your life and to give you that sense of peace and calm that's separate from the actions and inactions of life. The experiences of life come and go. Joys come, pain comes and goes. Everything comes and goes. And, so we want to be able to accept this is true. Doesn't mean we're always going to like it, but we don't need to suffer with it. Learn to let things go. Learn to forgive others. Forgive yourself. Learn to let things go. Because after this present moment, it no longer exists. All right? Cultivating compassion is another big one. Compassion towards yourself, compassion towards others. Everybody has a certain struggle. When you see people who are acting out, try and remind yourself that they're doing it because they are fearful, that they are scared. There's an insecurity that's playing out. Even when they're big and boisterous, there's an insecurity that's playing out. And you can have compassion. You don't need to call them out on it, but just have compassion towards them. Now, it doesn't mean that that you've got to put up with somebody who's being rude, or there's times I will distance myself from people, or I will address it, but it's how I address it that makes the difference. We want to have ethical conduct. You want to follow ethical principles. The reason for this is when you don't, your conscience will talk to you. And when you know you've done wrong, and if it keeps you up at night, or if it takes away your peace, don't do that. And if you have, forgive yourself. If you need to make amends, make amends. But moving forward, it's always about moving forward, then I'm going to conduct myself with putting a value on my integrity, putting a value on honesty. Okay? All this becomes very, very important. Reflection, as I mentioned, meditation, reflection. I am a big proponent of having a regular meditation, self-reflection process and practice. Meditation can be one-pointed. It can also be guided. It can be visual. The ones I tend to choose to use most are one-pointed because that's the foundation, and mindfulness. I also use a certain amount of guided or imagery as I am creating as well. Self-reflection is also journaling. Now, I like handwriting things out. I tried computer, but I get a greater intent when I journal. So journal, gain deeper insights into the nature of your mind and your desires. And if you truly, fully know yourself, then you will understand, to a large extent, others as well. And to the extent that you don't understand yourself deeply, not just on the surface, deeply, to that extent, you probably won't be able to understand and be empathic with other people. So, going back to ethical conduct, it also includes nonviolence in order to create this, harmonious and balanced life. Nonviolence, given part of what I do, my maximum to me is to do no needless harm. There are times, and everybody's called to something different. There are times when, if somebody is going to do harm to somebody who's in my care, my protection, or to myself, then I have the right to defend myself. And I may have to do harm to them if they're so engrossed in their own delusion that they're going to be harmful to somebody else or to myself. Then it's incumbent upon me, I feel, to stop it. Not everybody has that calling. It's part of why we train in martial arts. One of the reasons why we train in martial arts. There's a lot of other reasons the deeper you go into it. But just, you need to think these thoughts through. You need to think through, what am I comfortable with? What am I uncomfortable with? So living these four noble truths and, the Eightfold Path, so it gives you a framework, can aid in this transformative journey that will lead to a greater sense of understanding, a greater sense of inner peace, and the liberations from suffering. So, I'd love to hear your comments. If you like what you're seeing here, please be sure to like at Life and Living Now, and I appreciate your time. Thank you much.